There comes a moment along the path when the soul begins to move from a completely different place. It's no longer the mind seeking meaning, nor the body longing for stability. It's something far deeper, a kind of inner fire that ignites without your consent, without your planning or reasoning. It arises spontaneously, without warning, as if something ancient within you has stirred awake after a long, silent slumber. It's not euphoria. It's not motivation. It's a vibration, primal and intense, that shakes you from the inside and changes your entire way of being in the world. This fire does not burn to destroy. It reveals. It doesn't push you forward. It awakens you. And when it begins to activate, everything that is not truly you starts to fall away. You can no longer lie to yourself. You can no longer hide behind roles or routines. Your soul begins to remember why it came here in the first place. And this memory, though it doesn't come with words, feels like a silent urgency that shifts everything. One of the first signs is an inner impulse that you can't quite explain, but you also can't ignore. It doesn't come from logic, nor is it triggered by external goals. It's a call that vibrates straight from your chest, a fire that doesn't ask for permission, that doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It appears suddenly, like something inside you has been waiting for far too long to be lit, and now refuses to remain dormant. This impulse might not always have a clear shape, but it has direction. It moves you toward what is real, toward what feels alive. It pulls you away from whatever dims your light, no matter how familiar or secure. And even if the world doesn't understand why you're changing, you do. You're not searching for something new. You're responding to something ancient that has always been there, waiting. That impulse doesn't come with a map, but it's unmistakable. It may not tell you exactly what to do, but it makes it absolutely clear what you can no longer continue doing. You begin to wake up with a soft but persistent discomfort, a kind of restlessness that no longer disappears with distractions or noise, because it's not about filling voids anymore. It's about acknowledging that something within you is ready to burn, to illuminate, to transform everything from the root. You start to feel that pretending is no longer an option, that remaining in comfort feels like betrayal. You hear a voice deep inside you that can no longer be silenced by logic, that refuses to surrender to excuses, that cannot be numbed by distractions. This voice doesn't scream, it burns. And even if a part of you wishes you could extinguish it to keep fitting in, you know that it's already too late for that. You've crossed an internal threshold. The first spark has been lit. You also begin to notice that what used to satisfy you now frustrates you, not because you've become ungrateful, but because you now see what you couldn't see before, that you were dimming your own light to sustain structures that no longer sustain you. This inner fire doesn't destroy what's outside. It simply makes what isn't aligned unbearable. It pushes you, not as punishment, but out of integrity. And though it might hurt, it also liberates. With every step you take in the direction of truth, the fire grows stronger, not as a punishment, but as guidance. You can no longer fully fall asleep. You can no longer lull your soul with hollow routines, because something within you has been activated, something that doesn't ask for explanation, only space, something that refuses to bargain with fear, only with truth. This fire doesn't arrive to give you certainty. It comes to return you to yourself, to who you were before the masks, before the disguises, before the quiet agreements with the parts of life that were extinguishing your light. It doesn't ask you to know the whole destination, only not to deny yourself the beginning. Because once the fire starts to awaken, there's no turning back. The only way forward is to burn with purpose. You also begin to realize that this impulse doesn't need external validation. You're no longer waiting for approval or hoping someone else will understand what you're feeling, because you know from the deepest place within that this fire doesn't belong to anyone else. It's yours. It was born with you. It has always been there. Only now it's becoming visible, not as a passing emotion, but as a force that permeates everything. Your way of speaking, choosing, living. And that's what truly changes everything. You're not chasing a goal. You're returning to yourself. Every time you listen to that inner impulse and act from that space, the fire becomes more distinct, more present. You start choosing differently, not out of obligation, not from guilt, not from the fear of loss. You choose from a place of expansion, from that sacred space where something inside you ignites and nothing else makes sense unless it vibrates in resonance with that flame. Even when you feel lost, the fire doesn't leave. It remains, like an ember that refuses to be extinguished, not by doubt, not by fatigue. It stays there, quietly reminding you that something greater awaits, that no matter how many times you disconnect, you can always return. Because this fire isn't snuffed out by time. It only fades when you stop listening. And now, more than ever, you are beginning to listen. And so, almost without realizing it, the fire begins to guide your days, not with grand signs, but with small certainties, the kind you feel in your chest, the kind that don't ask for permission or explanation, the kind that burn but do not destroy, because they're not here to break you, they're here to reveal you. Slowly, you're remembering what your soul has always known, that you came here to light something up, something the world cannot extinguish. The second sign comes when you begin to release what once felt essential, and you do so without pain. People, places, habits, even long-held dreams that no longer resonate with who you are now. These things begin to fall away. There's no bitterness, no dramatic farewell. Instead, a quiet clarity settles within you, as though a wiser part of yourself, existing on a higher plane, is making decisions on your behalf. You might not fully understand the reasons behind this detachment, but you feel deep down that it isn't about loss, it's about cleansing. Your inner fire doesn't just illuminate, it also burns away the things that no longer serve a purpose. And what's most surprising is that in the act of letting go, you don't feel emptiness, you feel light. It's as though everything you release frees up internal space that had been occupied merely out of habit or inertia. It no longer hurts as much to step away from what was once part of your life for years, because now you understand something fundamental. Not everything that has played a role in your story is meant to accompany you in fulfilling your purpose. Certain relationships, beliefs, even parts of your identity, some of them are meant to stay behind as you step forward into a truer version of yourself. You're not running away. You're refining, tuning in more precisely to your essence. You no longer carry the weight of the past out of loyalty. You don't continue to hold on to what dims your light just because a part of you still feels guilty. Your inner fire isn't asking you to destroy anything. It simply makes it impossible to keep ignoring what no longer vibrates with you. And this clarity you feel isn't intellectual, it's energetic. Suddenly, what you used to tolerate with effort becomes suffocating, and instead of forcing yourself to stay, you choose to leave. This fire awakens an intolerance for self-deception. You can no longer justify relationships paths, or behaviors that don't align with your truth. Not out of judgment, but out of integrity. There's no more room to keep convincing yourself you're okay in spaces where you're clearly not. The fire now shines so brightly that it reveals everything you once managed to hide from yourself. And once you see it, you can't go back. What you're letting go of doesn't get erased. You honor it, but you no longer need it. There's no paralyzing nostalgia, only calm gratitude. You recognize that everything that leaves makes room for something more aligned with your present truth. Even if you don't yet have a clear vision of where you're going, your soul already knows. This new space opening up isn't a void, it's a preparation. Each act of letting go, when done from a place of authenticity, strengthens the fire within you. Every time you choose loyalty to your inner voice, that fire grows, because this inner fire isn't sustained by fear or attachment. It's fueled by your choice to prioritize truth over comfort. And slowly, that's exactly what you're doing. You're releasing who you no longer are to make space for who you're about to become. You also begin to notice that every time you release something from the soul, something inside you rearranges. You might not be able to explain it with your mind, but your body feels it. A tension eases, a burden lifts, a new space expands. It's not that letting go has become easy. It's that you can no longer keep holding on without dimming your own light. The fire that's awakening inside you doesn't negotiate with what doesn't resonate. It doesn't tolerate half-truths. It doesn't feed on what once was. It only responds to what's real in the present moment. Even when the goodbye is silent, you know it's final. Not because you've become cold, but because you've become certain. A part of you has already stepped into a new stage. Staying behind would be like trying to breathe in a place where there's no more oxygen. You no longer define yourself by what you leave behind. You define yourself by the profound act of choosing yourself, by the silent decision not to betray yourself, by the invisible gesture of honoring your evolution, even when it hurts. This inner fire is showing you that true loss isn't about losing others, it's about losing yourself. And that's no longer a risk you're willing to take. That's why your choices are different now. Not because you're tougher, but because you're more aware. You no longer fear walking alone if that companionship asks you to shrink. You no longer move from obligation, only from vibration. And if someone or something doesn't respect that new internal level, you let it go, not with resentment, but with reverence. And in that new space, which once felt like loneliness, you now feel presence. Because once you stop filling your life with things that don't vibrate with you, you start to truly feel your own essence. You begin to realize that you don't need to fill every corner. You just need to let your fire inhabit them. And that flame, even if small, is so pure and so true that you could never again settle for being lit by anything less than your own essence. You've stopped fearing the emptiness. Now, you see it as the prelude to purpose, as the sacred space where your soul begins to build what's real. And you, who are letting go without resentment, are showing that your fire is already burning, not out of reaction, but from awareness. Because you know that anyone who lets go from a place of truth is making space for something far greater. You also recognize that this kind of release is unlike anything you've experienced before. You're not closing cycles with anger or running to protect yourself. You're letting go from the deep understanding that your energy no longer fits there, and it doesn't have to. You no longer try to force something that was once beautiful to keep existing. because you've come to understand that true love, genuine connection, and real purpose never ask you to betray yourself in order to stay. You've stopped romanticizing sacrifice. You've learned that your soul did not come here to hold up what's falling apart at the expense of your light. What does it mean to keep holding on to what no longer resonates with you? It's not loyalty, it's abandonment of self. And you've decided to return to yourself, even if it means reconfiguring everything, even if it leaves you for a while in the silence of what hasn't arrived yet. Because that silence no longer scares you. You now see it as fertile ground. Every renunciation, even the painful ones, becomes a declaration. You're declaring that you deserve peace, that your energy is sacred, that your soul is now prioritizing purpose over attachment. And the universe listens to those invisible declarations. It responds when it sees you let go without fear of losing. Because you finally remembered something essential. What's true never leaves. What's true either stays or returns in greater alignment. And in that quiet act of release, you're not just setting others free, you're setting yourself free. You're making space for yourself, for the new that's trying to emerge from the depths of your being, for that voice that no longer has to compete with external noise, for that fire that now burns clearer, cleaner, steadier. You're learning to live without the weight of the unnecessary. You're walking lighter, more authentically, more yourself. And that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It means that finally, pain no longer makes your decisions. The fire does. The truth does. That part of you that doesn't need to speak has already chosen to keep going, burning bright. The third sign is when you begin to act without asking for permission. You no longer need others' validation to move forward. You don't wait for approval from your environment or for someone to tell you it's the right time. You simply do it, not from impulsiveness, but from an inner force that has become impossible to ignore, a silent certainty pushing you forward even when the full path is still unclear. That fire isn't asking for explanations, it's asking to be embodied. This action doesn't come from ego, it comes from the soul. You're not acting to prove anything. You're acting because you can no longer sit still while something inside you begs to be expressed, created, transformed. It's as if a part of you grew tired of waiting for the perfect conditions, as if you finally realized the perfect moment doesn't appear on its own. It's built from presence, from choice, from the kind of fire that won't go out, even when everything around you suggests it's not the time. You're no longer stopped by not yets. You're no longer held back by the doubts of those who don't feel what you feel. You've started honoring your inner impulse as a compass. You've understood that this movement born from within isn't chasing instant results. It's searching for alignment, action that matches your vibration, your transformation, all that you've been holding in out of fear of not being understood. And even though you don't know exactly where each step will lead, you know you can't keep waiting, because now you understand that postponing what's true is a form of self-abandonment. There are ideas, words, creations, and decisions that if they're not born now, will wither inside you. And you, who've been building this fire for so long, are no longer willing to let it die just to keep others comfortable. You start with small but authentic steps. You begin to make decisions that once seemed too big, to take risks that don't come from chaos, but from an inner steadiness that whispers, "This now aligns with who I am." And even if the world doesn't respond right away, You no longer wait for it to, because now you know that acting from your fire is already a response, already an agreement with yourself. This new strength isn't aggressive, it's calm, but unshakable. It doesn't impose, but it doesn't bargain either. It's that voice telling you that if you don't move now, the fire will start turning into ash. And you've decided you're not letting that happen again. Because now you know that acting from your center isn't a luxury, it's a soul necessity. You also realize that this kind of action doesn't require applause. You're not looking for recognition. You don't need anyone to see it or get it. You do it because not doing it would be a quiet betrayal of your soul. Because something in you has changed at the core. You're not moving to become someone. You're moving because you are someone now, and that someone can't stay quiet in spaces where their fire has no room. Every action you take from that inner center reinforces your presence. You don't need big wins or instant results. The fire within isn't rushed, it's committed. And you too are done waiting to feel ready. You've realized no one ever feels ready for what truly matters, that the fire doesn't ask for certainty, it asks for devotion. And if you keep waiting for everything to make sense before moving, you'll slowly burn out without even noticing. But once you surrender to it, something new begins to emerge. Not the full path, but the next step. A small step, so clear you can't ignore it. And when you take it, without needing approval, the fire grows stronger. Because that's what feeds it. Coherence. Not outside conditions, not others' judgments, not results, just the decision to stop postponing yourself. Even if no one else notices, you know what's awakening within. Because every time you act from that fire, everything shifts. Your energy becomes ordered. Your mind quiets. Your emotions align. There's no more inner conflict, because now there's direction. And you don't need to explain it. You feel the deep relief of having chosen yourself. You've started building yourself through movement, discovering who you are, not from waiting, but from action, rooted in your truth. You no longer need someone else to tell you the time is now, because deep down, you already know it is. You also recognize that every time you act from that inner flame, your entire energy field responds. You don't need to understand it to know it. You feel it in your chest expanding, in your breath growing lighter, in the absence of that tension you used to think was normal when doing what was expected instead of what was real. It's not that things become easier. It's that now, the hard things no longer paralyze you. Because moving with fire means moving with roots. And that makes you unstoppable. You no longer do things out of habit. You don't work just to emotionally survive. You don't speak just to fill silence. Now, every gesture carries intention. Every step holds presence. Because when fire moves you, everything you do leaves a deeper mark, even if no one sees it. It doesn't matter if others recognize it, you know it. And that inner knowing is more powerful than any external gaze. You also realize there's no going back. You can't return to acting from disconnection without your soul feeling it like a wound. Because now you understand the difference between acting from impulse and acting from alignment. And that difference is everything. You've learned that when you move from fire, you don't drain, you expand. You don't lose yourself. You sharpen. You don't hesitate. You move forward, even in uncertainty. And something even deeper begins to happen. The fire starts to give you identity. You no longer define yourself by your past, by your roles, or by the story others tell about you. You define yourself by your capacity to move from essence, from that invisible force that no longer fades or gets outsourced, from the coherence between who you are and what you do. That's what purpose is, the exact place where what you feel inside takes shape in the world. And it doesn't matter if no one tells you you're on the right path. You know it, not because of results, but because of resonance. Because when your inner fire becomes direction, no doubt can compete with the certainty of a soul set ablaze. The fourth sign appears when your resistance to change begins to dissolve. You no longer fight what is shifting. You stop clinging to the familiar out of fear. Instead of fearing movement, you begin to welcome it openly. Not because everything is suddenly clear, but because something within you has understood that the new doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to reveal you. Your inner fire has prepared you to walk through transitions without losing yourself. And that's why what once felt like chaos now begins to feel like possibility. You also discover that change no longer sweeps you away like it used to. You don't feel like a victim of movement, but a conscious part of it. You've stopped searching for stability in external things and are now finding it in your own ability to adapt without dimming your light. You no longer cling to what once worked because you know that what served you yesterday could become a cage today. Your fire has taught you how to let go without losing your essence, how to move without falling apart, how to change without betraying yourself. Each transition is no longer a threat, but an activation. You feel something in you grow stronger every time you let go without fear. When you take a new path without having every step figured out, and you don't do it unconsciously, you do it with radical trust in what you're feeling inside. Your fire doesn't need certainty, it needs room to burn. And when change comes, you don't block it, you recognize it as part of the design. You start to notice that the unknown no longer feels so heavy. You used to avoid it, fear it, delay it. And now, even though the vertigo remains, there's also momentum, because your inner fire pushes you not toward safety, but toward truth. And you, who already know what it feels like to betray yourself, choose more firmly what truly represents you. Even if it comes with no guarantees, change no longer feels like loss. It feels like expansion. Even in the midst of disorder, you feel something aligning inside. Even if the world shakes, you're steadier. Not because nothing affects you, but because everything that moves you now makes you stronger. You no longer see movement as a threat, but as part of your awakening, a necessary reconfiguration in someone who has ignited their inner fire and is willing to let that fire transform whatever it touches. You don't need to control every step anymore. You trust more in what you feel than in what you planned. You're no longer anxious about not knowing how things will end, because you've realized your inner fire isn't interested in endings. It's interested in transformations, and you're finally willing to walk through them. You've also come to recognize that every change in your life, even the most uncomfortable one, arrives with a message you're no longer willing to ignore. You've become so sensitive to misalignment that now you can feel when a chapter has ended, even if you can't yet name it. Before, you waited for external signs to let go. Now your inner fire is enough guidance. It speaks to you without words, telling you something has completed its cycle, and with increasing humility, you make room for the new. You've stopped negotiating with stagnation. You know staying in a place where you no longer resonate isn't stability, it's self-abandonment. And though the leap into the unknown still causes vertigo, you now trust your ability to fly. Because every time you've dared to release what no longer belonged to you. Life has shown you something greater, cleaner, more aligned, and that memory sustains you. You've also stopped seeing repetitive cycles as punishment. Now you see them as teachers. You understand that if something returns, it's not so you can hold it the same way, but so you can choose differently. Your inner fire has awakened a consciousness that no longer allows you to repeat what you once normalized, and that gives you power. The power not to react, but to respond. The power not to resist, but to move with the flow without getting lost in it. You've understood that change is not a disruption of your purpose. It's part of its activation. You're not here to do just one thing. You're here to evolve, to transform, to let old versions of yourself die off when they no longer represent you. And your fire knows that. That's why it burns when you stay too long in a place where you no longer grow. That's why it pushes you, even when you're still afraid, not to make you suffer, but to remind you of who you are. And in that silent memory of your soul, you begin to understand. There is no going backward when fire is leading the way. Even what looks like a detour is actually redirecting you. Even what seems like a loss is actually lightening your load. Because now, everything that moves, whether you understand it or not, vibrates in perfect rhythm with the purpose your soul has already set in motion. Sign number 5. Your truth no longer fits in small spaces. You've begun to speak, to express yourself, to reveal parts of you that you once hid in order not to disturb, not to disrupt the peace. But now, you can't hold it back. Not because you're trying to impose anything, but because the silence was consuming you. Your inner fire has started to push your voice outward. And that voice doesn't want to shout. It wants to resonate. You're not seeking attention. You're seeking alignment. And that's why what you used to hide is now shared with a calm strength that changes everything. You also realize that the way you express yourself has evolved. You no longer speak to convince. You speak to liberate. You no longer choose your words out of fear of being too much. You choose them out of respect for yourself. Your voice has stopped being a tool of adaptation and has become a channel for truth. And that truth may not always be comfortable, but it's yours, and that is enough. You begin to see how long you've been holding yourself back, how often you sacrificed your own peace just to maintain someone else's, how much you silenced what needed to be said just to avoid conflict. But now, the fire burning at your center won't let you stay silent where you need to speak your truth, because what isn't expressed gets blocked, and you've decided to unblock yourself. You no longer care about being too intense, too sensitive, too direct, because you've stopped measuring your voice to fit into spaces not meant for your truth. You've realized your energy was never meant to go unnoticed. It was meant to transform. And every time you speak from that fire, you don't impose, you illuminate. You don't attack, you reflect. You don't push, you awaken. Even when the right words don't come, your presence speaks. Your gaze, your silence, your frequency. Everything you once repressed now flows with a different rhythm, because your voice is no longer just sound. It's the extension of your soul. And that soul has remembered its purpose, to hold truth, even when it shakes, even when it isn't embraced. And most importantly, you've stopped asking for permission to be yourself, not from the ego, but from authenticity. You no longer wait for a safe space to show yourself. You are that space. You are that sanctuary. Because when you speak from what burns inside, you're not seeking applause. You're affirming that you can no longer dim your fire just to fit into someone else's comfort. You also notice that by allowing yourself to speak from that deep place, something within you comes into order, not because others understand or accept it, but because you finally stop fragmenting yourself. Each time you express what you used to hold back, you don't just free yourself, you integrate. And that integration feels like rest, like expansion, like finally being able to breathe without asking for permission. You've let go of needing ideal circumstances to be yourself, because you now understand that every moment you choose to be a vessel of truth is a sacred act, even if it goes unnoticed. You're no longer speaking from a need to be heard. You're speaking because what you carry inside can no longer stay in shadow. You know that every time you repress your light, something dims within you, and you're no longer willing to allow that. You also realize your voice doesn't need to be perfect. You don't have to know everything, say it flawlessly, or have a polished narrative. You just need to be honest, consistent, present. Fire doesn't demand form, it demands surrender. And you've begun to surrender, with less shame, with less guilt, and with more loyalty to what you truly feel. And it shows, not in volume, but in vibration. Your energy starts to speak for you. Your very presence becomes a message. You no longer strive to explain what others can't resonate with. You simply live it. You no longer argue your truth. You embody it. Because you understand that the real impact doesn't come from what's shouted, but from what's held with soul. By speaking from your fire, you also learn to hold the echo, to accept that there won't always be a response, that not everyone will know what to do with your truth. But instead of shrinking, you remain. Because now you know your purpose is not to please, it is to awaken. And awakening may be uncomfortable, but it always transforms. You are no longer a reflection of what others expect. You are the manifestation of a voice that has been ignited from within. And that voice, even if it trembles, even if it hesitates, even if it's still learning how to speak itself, can no longer be silenced, because your fire holds it now, and that fire will not go out. The sixth sign appears quietly, almost invisibly. You don't force anything, you don't make big moves, and yet everything starts to shift. People begin to walk away without drama, without a fight. Others enter your life for reasons you can't quite explain. Places that once gave you comfort now feel strange and distant. Outwardly, you're doing nothing different, but inside, your energy is no longer the same. Something has ignited, a fire, and that fire is starting to reconfigure your world. You may not notice it at first, or you might even feel confused, but soon, a deeper understanding arrives. This is not chaos. This is alignment. The path is being cleared ahead of your next step. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. And you begin to see that this reorganization of your life is not about loss, but about resonance. There's no need for angry goodbyes, no need to chase explanations. What no longer vibrates with your essence simply dissolves, quietly, without resistance, as if the fire burning within you has begun to expose every false connection, every fear-based pattern, every attachment you once held out of habit or insecurity. You don't have to fight. You don't even have to decide. Life, now aligned with your deeper truth, decides for you. And yes, it can hurt. At first, there's confusion, even grief. But that pain gives way to relief. You stop pretending. You stop forcing yourself to fit into roles and spaces that no longer reflect your soul. You no longer have to hide just to belong. And in that release, peace finds you. Not the shallow peace of comfort zones, but the peace of authenticity. You start to stand taller, speak clearer, act truer. You no longer shrink to fit in. You no longer hand over your energy just to avoid discomfort. You no longer stay quiet just to keep the peace. Because this fire inside of you isn't trying to destroy, it's trying to reveal. And anything built on lies, illusions, or outdated versions of you will melt away, not with violence, but with grace. No pressure, no force, just natural, inevitable transformation. And here's the most beautiful part. As your old world fades, a new one begins to rise. You begin attracting people who don't just like you, they recognize you. People who don't drain your energy, they fuel it. People who don't require you to dim your light, they help you shine it brighter. So if this resonates with you, if you've felt this shift, if you're living this change, know that you're not alone. This is the path of awakening, of alignment, of true power. And if you're walking this path, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. If this message stirred something deep inside you, don't leave without taking a step further. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next message your soul is waiting to hear. This space isn't for everyone. It's for those who are ready to let go of the version they were taught to be and rise into the truth of who they really are. Because this is just the beginning. How many times did you believe you were simply tired, when in reality you were standing at the edge of a collapse of the soul? Have you ever looked into the mirror and not recognized the face staring back at you? And what if I told you that perhaps, just perhaps, the worst has already passed and you didn't even notice it? True happiness is not exuberant, loud, or spectacular like pleasure or satisfaction. It is quiet, serene, and deeply internal. Carl Jung once said that some pains do not leave visible scars. Instead, they reorganize the soul from within. These are not the kinds of wounds we share aloud. They are the ones we hide even from ourselves. The pains we endured while smiling at the world, even as we slowly died on the inside. And here is the most terrifying thought. Maybe you already overcame all of that, without rituals, without applause, without anyone even realizing it. Because certain trials are so intimate, so hidden, that only silence itself is capable of bearing witness to them. Every one of us, at some point in life, faces a pain so profound that it dismantles everything: our values, our identity, our dreams, our faith. What remains is a strange and haunting emptiness. But what if that emptiness is not the end? What if it is, in truth, the womb of rebirth? Carl Jung described this as the process of individuation, a kind of psychological birth. Not everyone undergoes it. Most people survive pain only to continue hiding from themselves. But a few, a rare few, are reborn, not as someone better, but as someone more authentic, more whole. Today, we are going to walk together through 7 silent signs that you have endured the most painful trial of your soul and survived, not in the way the world expects, but in a quieter, deeper way. You survived without spectacle, without performance. You survived by becoming who you always were before the trauma, before the fall. We will not celebrate this with fireworks or loud declarations. We will recognize it simply, with a glance, with a shared silence, with that strange feeling of "I know exactly what you mean." Prepare yourself. You may see yourself here, perhaps for the very first time. There exists a form of solitude that drags you downward into the depths. It is not the romanticized absence of company. It is the dense and suffocating emptiness of feeling alien even to yourself. It is the experience of waking in the morning and asking yourself, with a sincerity that cuts deep, whether anyone would truly notice your absence. For a long time, you confused being alone with being broken, as if the silence around you exposed some secret defect within. You filled that silence with voices, faces, noise, distractions, anything to avoid hearing what was rising from within. And in a way, that made sense, because deep inside, in the most suffocated corner of your being, there echoed a despair you didn't know how to name. Jung referred to this as the hidden trial of the soul, that stage in which the very foundations of identity are dismantled so that something more authentic may emerge. But until that transformation occurs, solitude feels like punishment. Do you remember Jung's words? Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Think back to those nights when you scrolled endlessly through your feed, not out of genuine interest, but out of desperation. Think of that Saturday night when you did everything possible to go out, only to avoid admitting that the real fear was being left alone with yourself. Or that strange moment when, even surrounded by people, you felt invisible, or worse, non-existent. That is when the pain tightens its grip, because it is not the world that rejects you. It is you who abandoned yourself, trying to fit into affections that never truly saw you. You spent your life trying to be necessary to others so you would not have to face the question, if no one needs me, then who am I? And then one day, something changes. Not dramatically, almost imperceptibly. You realize that silence no longer threatens you. It begins to embrace you. And this transition is one of the greatest signs of psychological maturity a human being can undergo. Solitude turns into sanctuary. You start to discover that there is beauty in stillness, that the most powerful insights do not come from conversations, but from the spaces between them. You stop running and you begin listening. And what you hear is not the madness you always feared, but an ancient wisdom buried under layers of fear, masks, and stories others once told about you. Solitude is the place where truth dwells. In this new inner territory, you rediscover your own company, and surprisingly, it is good company. In the space once occupied by neediness and demands, something subtle begins to arise. Real presence. You notice how much energy you used to waste filling emptiness with people, with tasks, with urgencies that never truly belong to you. Now time slows down. The mind grows still. You sit with yourself, and you no longer feel ashamed of what lives within. At this point, your worth no longer depends on being seen. You stop performing to be validated. You stop running to be accepted. Solitude returns you to yourself, and with it comes an unexpected sense of freedom. The freedom to be who you are, even without witnesses. And people notice. They sense something different in you. It is not arrogance, it is depth. You no longer speak to convince. You speak because you have something real to say. And sometimes you choose silence because you have learned that silence also communicates, often with greater precision. That kind of presence cannot be faked. It comes from the journey through the desert, from those nights when you almost surrendered, but chose to hold on a little longer, just to see what might happen. And it did happen. What emerged was you, more whole, less dependent, more serene, less hungry. Of course, longing still visits you, but now you recognize it. It no longer dominates you. You greet it like an old acquaintance, but you no longer hand it the keys to your house. You stopped distracting yourself with crowds that never truly heard you. You finally began listening to the most important voice of your life, your own. And if someone asks you what changed, you may not know how to explain it, because it was not a rational decision. It was a silent mutation. Jung described it as the differentiation between the ego and the self, the moment when you stop being merely an image trying to please others and begin to embody a presence capable of sustaining your own existence. Solitude did not destroy you. It revealed you. And then comes another trial. Have you ever felt that the harder you try to hold yourself together, the faster you seem to break inside? That is not weakness. It is mental overload. We live surrounded by emotional noise, and no one ever taught us how to filter what truly matters. The real problem lies not in your emotions, but in the lack of mental structure to contain them. Most people act directly from emotion, without realizing they can cultivate a steadier, colder, more disciplined way of navigating life. And yes, it can be trained. There comes a moment in life when you stop running, not because you feel safe, but because you are tired. Tired of hiding from yourself, tired of pretending not to feel, not to think, not to desire what you truly want, tired of sustaining a domesticated version of yourself that the world demanded. And then, for the very first time, you stand face to face with what you always avoided, your shadow. To become conscious of your own shadow is a moral task. It is to recognize that evil is not only out there, but also within us. Jung described the shadow as everything we are, but refused to admit we are. It is the anger you swallow while smiling, the desire you judge as impure, the envy you deny, the cruelty contained in thoughts you would never dare to speak aloud. For years you tried to keep that side hidden. The shadow is uncomfortable. It unmasks you. It shows you that you are not simply a good person. You are complex, ambiguous, contradictory. And that realization hurts because it dismantles the idealized image you worked so hard to construct. But then, the day arrives. The day when hiding becomes more painful than facing it. The day when truth, no matter how uncomfortable, becomes less corrosive than the lie you tell yourself. And so, with fear, with trembling, with shame, you look, not with hatred, but with honesty. You see the manipulation you used to feel safe. You see the ways you tried to control others with guilt or victimhood. You see how you hurt the ones you loved most because you didn't know how to face your fear of abandonment. You see that behind your kindness, there was often a desperate hunger to be loved. And that vision tears you apart, but it also sets you free. Because for the first time, you stop performing. You drop the role of the good soul, the evolved person, the enlightened being. You begin to become real. Jung said, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is where true transformation begins. The shadow ceases to be an enemy. It becomes raw material. You realize you don't need to destroy your anger. You need to listen to it. You don't need to erase your ego. You need to integrate it. Your aggression, when accepted, transforms into courage. Your vanity, when illuminated, becomes healthy self-esteem. Your envy, when understood, reveals the dreams you buried. You don't become better, you become whole. And the most beautiful part, from this point forward, you begin to recognize the shadow in others, not with judgment, but with compassion. You see when someone manipulates because they feel powerless. You see when a criticism arises from a wound. You see when someone lashes out in violence because they never learned how to love. And you understand. Everyone is trying to cope with their own darkness. Some deny it. Others project it. But very few have the courage to integrate it. You have begun to develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites within yourself without being destroyed by them. You stopped chasing absolute coherence, and you started living your contradictions as part of your very nature. Being human means living in paradox. We are at once light and shadow, reason and madness, love and fear. And becoming conscious of this changes everything. You stop demanding purity from yourself and from others. You stop idealizing relationships, people, and ideas. You step into life with both feet on the ground, stripped of romantic illusions about perfection. And that is exactly what makes your presence rare. You carry an energy of truth, a vibration that doesn't pretend, doesn't force, and doesn't apologize for existing. People sense it. They feel that you are not there to please, but neither are you there to harm. You are simply there, in your wholeness, with your shadows, your light, and your boundaries. And that is power. Not the power to control, but the power of never betraying yourself. You stopped running from who you are, and now you walk with a confidence that does not come from certainty, but from intimacy with your own abysses. Whoever has seen themselves completely no longer fears the judgment of others. Whoever has tasted the bitter flavor of their own truth learns to recognize the taste of freedom. You spent your entire life looking at yourself through mirrors that were not yours. Every gesture, every choice, every word filtered through the unspoken question, "What will they think of me?" Yet no one warned you how much that would cost. No one told you that living under another's gaze means existing as a reflection, never as a presence. And the worst part is, even when you do everything right, you are still judged. Public opinion is not the conscience of the people. It is merely the judgment of the loudest voices. You shaped your personality like a chameleon trained to please. At home, you were one version, with friends another, at work, still another. And at night, when your head touched the pillow, only emptiness remained. Who am I when no one is watching? The truth is brutal. You spent so long editing yourself that you began to believe the edited version was the real one. And that made you sick. Because each time you adapted just to be accepted, you left a piece of yourself behind. Every time you swallowed what you wanted to say, smiled without meaning it, accepted without wanting to, you betrayed yourself. And the soul, though silent, records every tiny betrayal. To be normal is the goal of the defeated. Total adaptation to the world does not make us healthier. It makes us trivial. But there came a breaking point. You could no longer endure that diffuse discomfort, that causeless exhaustion, that nameless anguish. That was when you realized the truth. They were seeing you, but not looking at you. They were accepting you, but not loving you. Because love that must be won by performance is never real. It is conditional, unstable, fragile, and for that reason, you lived tense, always trying to keep the mask in place, always afraid it would slip. But the body tires, the soul demands truth, and one day you let go of the mirror. Not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of liberation. You began to ask, what do I think of myself? What do I desire without the filter of another's expectation? What do I feel when I am not trying to please anyone? And little by little, you began to recover from a dependency no one recognizes as addiction. The addiction to approval. The opinions of others do not disappear, but they lose their weight. You hear them, but you don't internalize them. You consider them, but you don't bend to them. Because now, something stronger exists within you. Inner authority. And that change is visceral. You stop measuring your worth through likes, reactions, or glances. You begin choosing what you wear, what you say, who you walk with, not to impress, but to reflect who you truly are. And the most striking part is that criticism still comes, but now it no longer paralyzes you. You observe it with the calm of someone who understands that not everyone will understand, and that is perfectly fine. Freedom begins when you stop caring about what others expect and start honoring what your soul truly needs. The world is not accustomed to those who can stand alone. Those who need no audience unsettle others. Those who do not justify themselves destabilize. Those who do not seek approval make others uncomfortable, and you will feel it. Some will distance themselves, others will call you arrogant, still others will try to push you back into the old script. They will say, "You have changed." But what they really mean is, "You stopped submitting." And that frightens me. Then you will understand that being yourself has a price, but it is a fair price compared to the cost of being what others expect. Because when you free yourself from the need to please, something extraordinary happens. You begin to recognize yourself in the mirror. For the first time, you look into your own eyes and feel presence. You feel truth, you feel dignity, not because you are perfect, but because you no longer betray yourself. Your communication changes. You speak less, but with more depth. You choose silence more carefully, and when you speak, no one doubts your words because they carry the energy of someone who is not trying to convince, only to express. And that is rare, and that is powerful. You do not close yourself off from the world, but neither do you bend to it. You no longer need to prove anything, because now who you are is no longer dependent on reflection. It is inside, fixed, alive, unshakable. Here ends the era of performance and begins the era of presence. Some deaths do not involve graves, do not require funerals, yet still bury the person you once were. Do you remember when that happened to you? It was not a single event, but a succession of inner collapses. First, your plans began to crumble, then your certainties. Later, your closest relationships slipped through your fingers, as if the universe had placed you in emotional quarantine. And then the final blow. You no longer recognized yourself. There is no awakening of consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And it was at that point when you thought, "It's over." But it was not over. That was the beginning. What you felt as an ending was the collapse of the false self. The structure you had built over years, made of expectations, adaptations, and wounds, was imploding. And like every building with weak foundations, ruin was inevitable. The psyche cannot endure forever in contradiction with the soul. That is psychological death, the collapse of the narrative, the internal cancellation of all you thought you were, a silence between what has ended and what has not yet been born. And yes, that space between the death of the old self and the birth of the new is terrifying. There is no ground, no compass, only the echo of doubt. What if I never find myself again? But the soul, unlike the mind, does not fear the void. It knows that chaos is fertile. The destruction that visited you did not come to punish you, but to free you. To be reborn, you must first allow the death of what you were. The old must die so that the new can breathe. And of course, you resisted. You tried to preserve old versions of yourself, to cling to relationships that were already dead, to force paths that no longer belonged to you. But the more you insisted, the more the universe whispered, "Let go." Letting go was not easy. because there was attachment, there was fear, because even emotional prisons hold a strange kind of comfort. They are familiar. But then, at some moment, in the middle of a sleepless night, a conversation, a breakdown of tears in the bathroom, something in you gave way, and you surrendered, not to defeat, but to mystery. You accepted dissolution. You allowed yourself not to know who you were. You stopped searching for an immediate meaning. And in that surrender, in that silent yielding, the subtle miracle began to take place. Rebirth. But not a rebirth filled with bright lights or heavenly choirs. It was organic, profound, almost imperceptible. You simply began to notice that even without knowing who you were, there was something in you quietly observing everything. An unbroken spark, a thread of consciousness that never snapped, a silence that was not empty, but like a womb. When everything seems lost, it is then that we are closest to ourselves. Reconstruction was not quick, and it never will be. You do not return to being someone after disintegration. You reinvent yourself piece by piece, but now with authenticity. What once was a hunger for approval becomes a search for inner coherence. What once was anxiety for control turns into the practice of patience. You begin to walk more slowly, to speak less, to value things that once seemed insignificant. The smell of coffee, the light entering through the window, the rhythm of your breath. Urgencies change, haste loses meaning, depth becomes your compass. And little by little the people around you begin to notice, though they cannot explain it. They sense something different in you, something that cannot be taught, only lived. You now carry a calm that did not come from the absence of pain, but from facing it. A strength that does not shout, but sustains. A maturity that does not flaunt diplomas, but honors what is essential. You stopped merely surviving and began to truly exist. That is real freedom. Not living as others expect, but as you truly are after everything. And when you look back at the ruins, you no longer feel shame. You feel gratitude, because it was there, on the cold ground of your fall, that you finally touched your truth. And you will never be the same again. There is a kind of silence that is not absence, but absolute presence. You have come this far, and perhaps you have not yet realized how much you have changed. But something within you, invisible and indescribable, no longer allows certain things. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped wasting energy in arguments that lead nowhere. You stopped accepting invitations out of guilt, replying to messages out of obligation, smiling when everything in you cried for retreat. Not because you became cold, but because you finally understood the value of what you carry. Your energy has become sacred. Individuation is the journey through which a human being becomes who they truly are, free from external expectations and loyal only to their inner essence. Carl Jung spoke of it as the movement from living under the weight of masks to living in the clarity of one's authentic soul. What once was excess now becomes a filter. You, who once were available to everyone, now choose carefully. You, who once said yes to everything, now understand the weight of a no spoken with firmness and tenderness. And perhaps the most extraordinary part is this. People can feel it. Without uttering a single word, your body communicates. The space around you announces it. Not every kind of energy is allowed in. You no longer need to force yourself or impose anything. You simply emanate. And that emanation is not arrogance, it is clarity. It is as if your very presence has been tuned to a deeper frequency, one that does not seek to please, nor to fight, but simply to be. To those still enslaved by the need for external approval, that quiet strength feels unsettling. For your serenity cannot be manipulated. Your silence is no longer emptiness. It has become fortitude. And your distance, so often misunderstood, is nothing more than energetic self-protection. To learn to respect one's own energy is one of the highest acts of spiritual maturity. In the manuscripts inspired by Jungian thought, this wisdom echoes: not everyone deserves access to what is most sacred within you. Your attention, your time, your listening, your very soul. You stopped insisting on reaching out to people who refuse to reach for themselves. You stopped trying to save those who insist on remaining in chaos. Finally, you learned the difference between empathy and self-abandonment. And perhaps the hardest step of all, you forgave yourself. You forgave yourself for the times you gave too much, bent too much, and carried too much of a burden that was never yours to bear. The forces that once ruled you, guilt, scarcity, fear of rejection, are now nothing but history. Not because you erased them, but because you transcended them. Your presence now carries weight, a gravity that no longer bends to superficial spaces. You cannot fit into shallow places anymore, and your soul refuses to shrink itself to fit. For that reason, some people will drift away, but those who remain fully. Now you draw toward you people, experiences, and paths that vibrate in resonance with your inner reunion. And you quietly release anything that belongs to the old versions of yourself, those exhausted versions who gave endlessly and were never seen. Your energy is no longer currency. It has become a temple, and you alone choose when to open the doors, and most of all, with whom. This sovereignty cannot be achieved by techniques or forced practices. It does not come from books, courses, or esoteric rituals. It is the natural side effect of having died and been reborn within yourself. Now you carry a center, a grounding axis, an inner place that no one can ever invade. And the most beautiful paradox is this: it makes you less violent, not more. You no longer shout to be heard. You no longer argue to be respected. You no longer stretch yourself just to be loved. Instead, you preserve yourself. And in a world that profits from your exhaustion, that preservation is the most revolutionary act of all. True power does not lie in dominating others, but in refusing to let them dominate you. As Viktor Frankl once said, the essence of freedom is not in control over circumstances, but in the refusal to surrender your inner sovereignty. You have become someone who no longer seeks to stand out, and yet you do, because your energy is no longer scarcity, it is consistency. You have nothing left to prove. Not that you are well, not that you have figured everything out. You simply know. You have arrived. You have arrived at yourself. You have arrived at a place where your soul can finally rest, where peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence of inner coherence. Life will, of course, continue to test you. But now, you no longer respond with despair. You respond with silence, with discernment, with maturity. Because in the end, the clearest sign that you have overcome the deepest trial of your soul is not in what you have conquered, but in what you no longer give away, your energy to those who cannot honor it. If these words are reaching you, it is not by accident. Only those who have felt their soul crack open from within, who have had to gather themselves in silence just to keep breathing, can recognize the subtle signs of their own transformation. You did not merely survive pain, you walked through it. And that changes everything. Because survival is resistance, but walking through is transformation. It is opening yourself to the storm, like opening a window in the middle of chaos, not to shield yourself, but to let the air finally move through. And that is what you did. Perhaps without witnesses, perhaps without applause, but with a courage that does not scream. It whispers. You change the way you face silence, the way you face shadow, judgment, falling, limits, energy, and above all, your truth. You did not rebuild yourself to please or to fit in. You rebuilt yourself to stand, and finally, to sustain yourself. That is rare. That is sacred. That is psychologically revolutionary. Individuation is not the pursuit of perfection. It is the radical acceptance of the self. Jung described it not as becoming flawless, but as becoming whole. And perhaps you are still on the way. Perhaps you still stumble over old patterns. Perhaps you still wonder whether you are healed. But listen carefully. Healing is not a destination. It is a way of walking. It is how you carry your pain without denying it, without romanticizing it, without letting it rule you. You are no longer the same, and that alone is what matters. Now you see beyond the surface. Now you have the calm to hold the unknown. Now you discern when to protect your energy. Now you possess the maturity not to be swallowed by the chaos of others. And now you hold silence. Yes, a silence that does not kill, but shelters. That silence is the proof that the soul has passed through fire and emerged whole, even if marked. And now you know. What once felt like the end was only the blossoming of what had always been there, asleep, waiting to ripen. Your truest presence. You may sometimes feel nostalgia for who you once were, but believe me, you lost nothing that was truly yours. You only shed the excess, the defenses, the noise. And in that release, you created space. Space to exist. Space to feel. Space to live with psychic dignity. You no longer need anyone's permission to exist. Your soul has already legitimized you. So breathe. You made it here. Not unscathed, but lucid. Not perfect, but whole. And that is the real victory of a soul that has passed through its darkest trial. It did not become stronger. It became truer. And from this point forward, everything shifts because you have shifted. And where you now place your feet, new paths begin to form. Years ago, I too went through one of those seasons when life turns you inside out and forgets to sew you back together. Everything seemed meaningless. Words, bonds, even faith itself. And the most painful part was that no one noticed. Outwardly, I kept smiling, producing, answering messages. But inside, I was in ruins. Until one day, in the middle of my collapse, I came across a line from Jung. I don't remember if it was in a book, in a note, or if life itself whispered it. But it said something like this: what you need to heal is not outside. It is in what you refuse to face within yourself. That pierced through me. In that moment, I realized that what I was calling suffering was nothing more than the summons to finally meet myself. And today, after many falls, silences, and rebirths, I decided to create this space, this channel, this late-night conversation where you can take off the mask, lower your shoulders, and whisper, I have been there too. If this message spoke to some forgotten part of you, if you thought at any moment, this is exactly what I needed to hear, then leave your trace here. Share your thoughts, your wounds, your reflections. Let this space not just be my voice, but also yours. Because in a world that demands we pretend sanity, here you are allowed to be human. And perhaps together, we will keep finding each other in the dark, in the depth, and in what is most true within us.